Call Jackson Carlo to open for the Conservatives.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I begin by thanking the First Minister for fulfilling, really in my experience, a promise made in this Parliament for the very first time. I have just received a copy of her migration proposals, so thank you. I move and speak to the amendment in my name, and let's be upfront about why we are here today. It's not because the First Minister thinks she is going to hold a referendum this year. She knows that's not going to happen. The reason we've been called here today is because she needs to convince the Yes movement behind her and beyond that something is happening, or that if something isn't actually happening, then don't worry, it'll be happening soon. It points to the real indictment of this government. Divided, fearful to tell hard truths to its own political supporters, so obsessed about mollifying them in some way that the interests of the people of Scotland get shoved to one side. Well, if the First Minister feels the need to attend marches in her spare time to shore up her position with Joanna Cherry and the diehards, then that's up to her. But I don't see why the majority of the country have to play along with this ridiculous charade. She says there'll be a referendum by Christmas. Really? Well, given the state of the ferry service over which she presides, they'd better start sending the ballot papers to the islands now. There's going to be a new white paper, and we're still to accept, according to the First Minister, that the last one was the most authoritative ever. Breathlessly, her tame polling company claims that people do support a referendum being agreed, and yet somehow forget to ask people whether they actually support independence. If only this government spent the same amount of attention on police and schools as it does on polling and spin, we might have the safest streets and the best schools in Europe. And while the SNP debate amongst themselves their favoured route to another referendum, what the timetable should be, and whether or not the approval of Westminster, most people outside the political bubble just look on in either wearied resignation or abject fury. The debate people outside this chamber want to see is about how to drive up educational standards and give their children the solid start in life they need and deserve. Instead, they get parliamentary statements about more referendums. They want to see action on how to tackle a drugs death crisis that is claiming over 1,000 Scottish lives every year, the highest in Europe. They want to see action to reverse the record low attainment result in Highers and Advanced Highers in Scotland's schools. They want to see the 4-year rise in violent crime stopped, frontline officer numbers protected, and a government which doesn't describe collapsing ceilings in police stations as hyperbole. Instead, civil servants are directed to waste time drawing up more plans for independence. People want a debate over how to grow our economy, create more better paid and secure jobs, to drive up living standards for everyone in Scotland. Instead, here we go again, more time devoted to this First Minister's personal obsession at the expense of the country's real and pressing priorities. You know, perhaps the First Minister really can't let it go. Perhaps she's fated to see out the rest of her days in office single-mindedly banging the drum for separation. That's a grim prospect for the rest of the country, but perhaps that's the way it'll be. Only in the corridors of the Scottish Government, alone in the 4 nations of the United Kingdom, do we see a government determined to keep us stuck in the past. The rest of the UK moving on, Scotland left behind. And there's a real tragedy here too. This government promised a fresh start after the division of the 2014 referendum. And in the First Minister's own words, she made a heartfelt promise to serve all Scots regardless of how they voted in that referendum. How hollow it all sounds now. Instead of healing the divisions of 2014, this government has exacerbated them. Instead of the fresh start promised, we have had 5 years of unceasing agitation for independence. Instead of a laser-like focus on education, health and the economy, they all have been sidelined in favour of this First Minister's singular priority.
First Minister.
In his speech, is he going to address the fact that in 2 days' time Scotland will be taken out of the European Union against our will? He used to oppose that. He's now a born-again Brexiteer, but I think the people of Scotland perhaps deserve to hear him justify that fact.
Jackson Carlo.
I'm speaking to the amendment in my name which concentrates on the priorities the people of Scotland actually want to see addressed. Most people will see the last 5 years as a catalogue of wasted opportunities to improve Scotland. You know, that's the real material change in circumstances, public service failure under the SNP. Most people want this government, this parliament, all of us to dedicate our efforts to the education, health, prosperity and well-being of our people. Isn't it about time this government listened to the voice of most people? Isn't it time this First Minister finally acted on the pledge she made back at the start of her term in office to serve all Scots and the interests of all Scots, whether they voted for or against independence? Isn't it time this First Minister and this government put aside their endless campaign for another constitutional, for a vote a consistent majority of the people of this country don't want, and instead focused on the real priorities of our country? Today, another 2.5 hours of parliamentary time will be wasted on debating yet another statement on independence, in which there was nothing new. That's all to be saved for other people, not this Parliament, on Friday. Instead, let's get back to the business the people outside this chamber elected us to deal with. Presiding Officer, First Minister, make this the last such debate. We're fed up.
Thank you, and I call Richard Leonard to open for the Labour Party.
Presiding Officer, I completely understand that the thought of 5 more years of a Boris Johnson government is driving some people to despair and yet others to anger, that there is widespread discontent. But what must be understood in this Parliament, in this debate this afternoon, is that the people of Scotland do not want another independence referendum anytime soon. Because they know, the people know, and they apply common sense to this question. They know that we need to do some hard thinking and work hard through the Brexit situation, and they know that until we do that, given the profound uncertainty about the nature and terms of our future economic relationship, our trading relationship, and the future social and cultural relationships between the people of the United Kingdom and the people of the European Union, that a referendum in 2020 makes no sense whatsoever. And that is the proposition that we are being asked to vote on this afternoon. The First Minister herself has said that a second independence referendum should not happen until after Brexit was done. Well, Brexit is not done, and it will not be done in 2020. So where the government motion talks of a material change in circumstances, we do not yet know what those changes will be. And however lofty the First Minister's rhetoric is, she knows, everybody knows, that in the end, this afternoon, the First Minister is playing a game, because nobody in this chamber really believes that there will be a referendum this year. I'm not sure that many people in this chamber really believe that there should be a referendum this year. So members of this Parliament are being asked to vote for what they know to be is a falsehood, and many of them are prepared to do it willingly. This debate today is not an example of a good use of power. The First Minister claims to be speaking for Scotland, but she is not even speaking to Scotland. Nicola Sturgeon is using this Parliament to speak to her own party, and she is not even telling them the truth. So it is rather contemptuous. It is a rather contemptuous use of power, the power that the government is using this Parliament for this afternoon. The government's motion is a synthetic political manufacture dressed up as high principle. It is our duty as members of this Parliament to expose that and to offer real leadership on this question. And it is our duty to represent all of the people, not just to placate an over-agitated political base of activists. And we know the numbers in this Parliament, and that the Greens will support this motion today. Although I say to the Greens, in all sincerity, that a turn to nationalism at the time of a global economic and climate crisis is a move in precisely the wrong direction. We should not be putting national boundaries up. We should be pulling national boundaries down. And our objective as members of this Parliament is to promote the welfare of the people, not just the material welfare, but welfare in the broader sense. So, in our amendment, we call on the Government to focus its energies on minimising the impact of the Tories' disastrous Brexit deal, to double down on ensuring that in the coming months, powers are repatriated to Scotland during the Brexit process, to focus on establishing a new home rule principle fit for the 21st century, where in the wake of Brexit, all that can be devolved is devolved, and not just to the Scottish Parliament, but to local government and to local communities right across Scotland. It is a vision of a modern 2020 home rule which recognises that we need to radically redistribute wealth and power by tackling inequalities, rather than simply reproducing them in a separate Scottish state. I'm in my last minute. It is a realistic vision of a redistribution of power, not just between parliaments, but a redistribution of power and wealth between people too, because that is where, in the end, the real divisions in our society really lie. And that means we must amend and extend the financial powers of this Parliament. We must start to use the powers that we already have for planning our economy, building the homes that our families need, tackling the long-standing challenges of public health, giving hope to our young people,
Order, please.
Giving dignity to our pensioners in retirement, meeting the challenges of climate change, of technological change, of creating the caring society, extending democracy into our economy and into our communities, and so creating a more tolerant, equal Scotland. That should be this Parliament's priority, giving people hope over fear. I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you. Before I call Willie Rennie to speak about the Liberal Democrats, could I just ask members just to stop the ongoing heckling? And this applies to members across the chamber. Can I particularly ask members of front benches not to do so? Willie Rennie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I did wonder this afternoon when I saw the wording of this motion and the fact that we're going to have two speeches this week on independence, not just one, but two, whether this debate was actually for me or whether it was for the different factions of the SNP to sort out whether they were going to move for a referendum now, next year, ever. What kind of timing, what kind of framework? Was it going to be a wildcat referendum? Was it not? But of course, I like to engage in these kind of debates, if not just to put the SNP right on these important constitutional issues. I'm intrigued at the fact that Alex Neil, that Brexiteer, is using Brexit as a justification for having another independence referendum. Not just a referendum, but a wildcat referendum backed by Mary Black and Joanna Cherry and a few others, I'm sure, and Kenny McCaskill, who says that we shouldn't have another independence referendum just now. We should focus on the day job. Probably the first time I've ever agreed with Kenny McCaskill, and has actually led to some people saying we should bring Kenny back. I'm not sure whether that would be met with wild appreciation. Or Mike Russell, who thinks it's racist to heckle Ian Blackford in Westminster while heckling Willie Rennie in this chamber. So, but of course it's important in this week, it is important to mark this moment, because this is a sad week. For pro-Europeans like me, it is a sad week. We are leaving the European Union. We fought hard every step of the way, not just when it was politically convenient to do so, but every step of the way. We spent more in the European election than we did on the Shetland by-election. Who would have thought that? It was important to stand up for what we believed, and we did so in that campaign. So this week is a sad week for pro-Europeans. But we should learn the lessons of Brexit, not repeat them with independence. We've had years of division over Brexit and independence before that. People are sick, fed up of it. They want to move on to the big challenges that the country faces. Just look at the division that we faced all those years ago in 2014. Friends, families, neighbours, business people divided over the issue of independence. Just the same was repeated on Brexit too. Look at all that investment that was held back in all those years during the independence debate and the Brexit debate as well. We should not be repeating those mistakes all over again. So let's learn the lessons of Brexit. Let's look to the Irish border. Let's look to the problems that that's caused in those communities. Let's learn those lessons. We have deep-rooted relationships between people north and south of the border in the United Kingdom. Deep-rooted relationships. And those have been lasting for 300 years. We've seen the turmoil that comes with breaking up a 45-year-old partnership with the European Union. Just imagine how much more difficult it would be to break up a partnership of 300 years. But the argument about the mandate, apparently this afternoon the SNP will claim that this Parliament has voted again for a mandate for another independence referendum. I disagree. The SNP do not have a majority in this Parliament. They do not have a majority in this Parliament. The Greens put forward a proposal in 2016 to say that they would need 1 million signatures on a petition. Now, I've hunted high and low, and I cannot find this petition. I would be surprised it's got one name on it, let alone 1 million names on this petition. So they will not have a mandate this afternoon. And to claim the general election is a mandate as well is false. It has already been referenced that the SNP did well in the general election. I admit that. But 45% is not any more votes. In fact, because the turnout was lower than the referendum in 2014, it's even fewer votes than they got in 2014. So there's no change at all for that. I thought they supported a PR voting system as well, a fair voting system. But all of a sudden they're claiming that having 47 or 48 MPs is also a mandate, but it isn't. And I also remember Nicola Sturgeon in the general election softening the message in the last week. I remember her appealing to people who were in favour of the United Kingdom. Not just now. I remember those people who were saying they favour, not just now. I will come to the First Minister in a second when I am ready. So when the First Minister in that election, she softened the message. She appealed to Labour voters, to Liberal Democrats, to say, come with us to stop Boris, not just now. Come with us to stop Boris Johnson. Hardly any mention of independence at that stage. Then it was ramped right up after the general election. She does not have a mandate for independence. I'll give way to the First Minister.
Willie Rennie has set out today what, in his view, does not constitute a mandate for an independence referendum. Perhaps he'd use some of his time now to tell us what, in his view, would constitute a mandate for an independence referendum, and we might make some progress.
Willie Rennie.
I am not obsessed about independence. I do not think every day of the week how we're going to get another independence referendum. I can guarantee you, if you vote Liberal Democrat, we will use every opportunity to vote against independence because it's dividing our country and it's damaging our economy. And I don't know, Presiding Officer, whether they're following your encouragement to be a little bit more quiet in this debate, but I suspect they are not. But what we need to recognise is that the SNP do not have that mandate. And as far as I'm concerned, if you vote Liberal Democrat, they will never have that mandate. We need to move on. We need to unite the country. We need to tackle the challenges that we all face. And if we do that, we'll have a better Scotland and a better United Kingdom.
Thank you very much. And I call on